All right, welcome. So I kind of want to do an introduction to multiple screen resolutions and how to handle those dynamically. I know, when you're first starting out with tutorials, you're gonna see a lot of people doing like project settings, right? Especially when you're doing like a pixel art game, you'll probably have the window width and height set to a small value, like 320 by 180 or 640 by 360, that kind of thing, and then you're going to use the window width override to stretch it out, and that's fine for your game and your monitor. But the problem is, what happens when you give it to your friend who has a 4K monitor, or you decide you want to release the game and you want to have some settings? How do you start going about understanding viewport widths, heights, aspect ratios, and all that stuff? So this is going to kind of be a long-winded introduction into that. So bear with me, but. I did make this project, and I'll link it in the description below, and you're free to download it and use it just to sort of see how things go, just to kind of walk you briefly through the project if you just want to stop here and not listening to me ramble for another half hour or whatever it is ends up being. This project, when you start it out, there's a little overlay that will let you set things like the window size, so you can kind of scale it down or up, and set the width dynamically. And then using the content scale, you can also decide, hey, I want to render this at like 320 by 180, and I want to stretch it based on canvas items, for example. Now you can see how that's going to be affected. And I even have more tabs. I know it's not necessarily the best UI, so apologies, but you can see based on these different tabs, we're going to go through all of these things and how you sort of set that up, and then there's the example projects for you to look through. All right, so without further ado, this understanding aspect ratios, I think, can be a little bit confusing, and so I'll start out with a rambling anecdote, since I'm an old man who likes to tell rambling anecdotes. So I was a kid. I grew up in LA, and I had a lot of acquaintances and friends and stuff whose parents were in the industry. And I think I was about 13, and I was having lunch with these people, and they were talking about Star Wars and how there was like this new Star Wars that had just come out, that showed you more of the movie. And I was like, oh my God, there's like I was a huge Star Wars fan, so like, oh my God, I can see more of Star Wars, So I ditched school the next day, and I took my little scooter, because I was crappy at riding a skateboard, down to the video store, and, with a whole stack of quarters for enough for a Domino's pizza and a movie. And I go to the guy, and it was like probably this like 18-year-old kid who, was like all gothed out and stuff. And he's like, and I go to him and I'm like, hey, do I heard there was like this new Star Wars movie that showed you more of the movie. And he's like, oh, you mean the letterbox version, dude? And I'm like, well, yes, of course, my good man. Of course I mean the letterbox version, without having any idea what that meant. And so he rents me the movie. I get my quarters, my Domino's pizza, and like scoot home and pop it in the VCR, because I just had these old kind of crappy Star Wars VHS tapes. And I started up, and there's like these black bars at the top and bottom of the movie. And we used to have those TVs that were 4x3s, and it was basically furniture. It was like wood paneled everything. And I saw, you could see like this much of the movie, and it was like this like little rectangle, and there was these black bars, and I thought, oh my God, this like tape is broken. And I spent my good quarters on that, saved up from all sorts of like arcades over the past month. So I scoot back to the video store. I'm like, hey, this tape is broken, man. And he's like, I told you it was letterbox. I was like, yeah, what does that mean? And he's like, you said you knew. And I was like, I don't. And he's like, you are, so you're seeing the whole Star Wars movie. And I was like, I don't get it. He's like, that's what letterboxing is, dumbass. It's you see the movie as it was supposed to be, and of course, because the aspect ratio was different, you see these black bars on the top, and that's letterboxing. So just to show you what I mean is, like, let's take Jaws for example, right? So great movie. If you haven't seen it, I can't believe you wouldn't. But this is like, for instance, this is a scene you would see in Jaws, right? And you see, Richard Dreyfuss and Roy Scheider and oh my God, what is his name? anyways, boat goes in the water, you go in the water, sharks in the water. That guy is great. Black eyes, like a doll's eyes. All right, I'll stop doing my impressions. But when you watched it when you got your average VHS tape, you were seeing the 4:3 version, right? It was edited. It was actually modified. And this is a 4:3 aspect ratio. And so you can see, right, you're just seeing like barely, I mean, a little over half the frame, but not much, right? Not much better than half the frame. And you're missing a whole part of the movie. And so really, the only way to squish this whole frame into a 4:3 TV is to shrink it down, right? And what happens necessarily is you'll see these black bars on the top and bottom, and that was called letterboxing. So I hope that gives you at least a little sense of like how we're going to deal with aspect ratios and how stretching modes and that kind of thing will affect whether you're going to see letterboxing or not, or whether you're going to have to see more of your game, or you're going to have to shrink things down and stretch them appropriately depending on what the user's screen monitor resolution is. Now, just for one little extra fact, fun fact is that most monitors now are 16:9, which is still not truly widescreen. This, like Jaws and most movies, were filmed in CinemaScope. And interestingly, now being an ultra wide monitor user, I will never go back to a normal monitor. But the 21:9, or better yet, 43:18, which is the actually mathematically correct ratio, is CinemaScope. So if you ever, want to play games in a true cinematic experience with a cinematic aspect ratio, then do yourself a favor if you have the means to pick up an ultra wide, because they are nice. I think I got this one. It's like an LG. It's not necessarily the nicest monitor, but it was like 200 US on at Costco. It was the floor model, but they don't necessarily have to be crazy expensive either. Obviously, it's not the nicest contrast and stuff, but it definitely is a different experience. Anyway, and that's actually why you see my Windows bar is like weird, right? Because it's like got all this space here, and then the Windows go. Well, that's because there's actually all this space off to the right of the monitor. I'm just doing it just the 2K frame, so it's literally just OBS is just cut off, a bit of my screen. All right, so let's go back to the project, and like I said, I'll link in download. Feel free to download it, I don't need a new one, and kind of look along with me. So, when you first start out, I think, like we said, there's the project and project settings, but the problem is you can't really change, in Godot, you can't change the project settings without restarting, and it's not necessarily the most ideal way, because you'd have to get that, write the parameters to a file, change the project settings when you start it up, and then do it. But we want to do this dynamically, and so that's where this starts out. So let's just start by hitting make sure you're in the display settings. I do have this other scene in there just to show you, which we might get to towards the end, or maybe it'll eventually be another tutorial about using embedded windows, so you can have a UI that's a little bit different than your game window. So your UI can be like nice and sharp, whereas your game window can be that. But let's just start out with a basic project, which is this. So if we run the scene, let's just have a look and see what's going on. So I have this little UI here, right, and it's got these other tabs, and I just want to walk through some of the settings. And a lot of these settings you can find by going to the project settings and looking at the window and seeing all these different stretch modes, the canvas stretch, for example, but we'll go through them dynamically and see how that affects it. So the first and most obvious thing is when you have a game running and you decide a certain resolution, you don't necessarily have to stretch it. Like for instance, if the user, for instance, changes the windows at the default settings, if you're not going to stretch it, and that's going to be these stretch modes and content scale settings, if you're not going to actually change the scale mode to stretch the items based on either canvas items or viewport, you'll just see more of the game. And that's fine. Like for a lot of games, that's okay. Just realize that if somebody's on an ultra wide, for example, they're going to see a lot more of the game, especially on the sides. And if you haven't rendered those pixels or whatever, or your world isn't big enough, they're just going to see sort of a huge amount of empty space on the sides. And let's just look at a game like Stardew Valley. That's exactly what Stardew Valley does. Like, here's the game, but as I stretch the window, I just see more and more of the game. I just see more and more of the game, and that's okay. That's how Stardew Valley handles it. I think Dave the Diver, for example, when you're on an ultra wide, it just has essentially letterboxing where you just see these black bars on the left or right side, and it colors them in, so that it's not, you're not looking at empty space. So they did like at least consider that, but the main game window is always 16:9. Like that's the aspect ratio. But more and more, of course, we have all of these different resolutions. So as you can see on this background that I made, it has all the different resolutions. So let's just walk through them. 320 by 180 is the classic 16:9 resolution, and those are just upscaled. So 640 by 360. 1280 by 720, 1920 by 1080, of course, is the usual resolution of most people's monitors. But of course, a lot of people have 2K monitors or even 4K monitors, and those are these sort of more 16:9 resolutions. But as you can see, here's the 1330 by 1440, and you can see there's a lot more pixels off to the right than the typical 2K monitor. So you're getting about 20% more real estate. And similarly, there's there's a lot of computers now and laptops that are 16:10, and those are these resolutions like 1280 by 800, 1920 by 1200. I think there's also 2560 by 1600. I didn't make that one, but that's another resolution. And so this background is just going to stay at that resolution, and we're going to see how expanding the game windows and changing the stretch will affect what we can see. All right, so that's enough of that. So as you can see, without any stretch, as you increase the game window, you're just going to see more and more of those resolutions, depending on how big your monitor is. But I think for most pixel art games, right, you're used to doing the content scale and that kind of thing. So let's go back. We'll use our little arrows here to tab. And let's say, just for the sake of making this a little bit more visible on camera, I'm going to use 640 by 360. So we're going to set the content scale size to 640 by 360. And the content scale is what your targeted, like what the resolution that you actually want to render is, right? That's how many pixels I actually want to be there. Now, of course, if you do just 360 by 640 by 360, and you do, either, and then you also have to set this canvas scale mode. If you don't do that, then you're not going to see any stretching. But let's do the content scale size at 640 by 360, and we'll stretch it just based on canvas items, and we'll quickly go over the difference between canvas items and viewport. But the reality is it's a pretty simple distinction. Canvas items will stretch based on it'll just stretch each individual item to where it's supposed to be. And so if you have a high quality image, here I have a picture of George Carlin, as you stretch it by canvas items, you'll see the resolution stays nice. But if you switch it to viewport, it'll start to be pixelated. And that's just because it's rendering at a smaller thing, and then the viewport is just getting, those pixels are just getting expanded by a nearest neighbor algorithm to continue being pixelated. And so for your pixel art games, you're probably going to want a viewport stretch. But if you're doing a like a full resolution art game, where your textures are 2K or whatever, then you probably want canvas item stretch to keep the quality crisp and not end up with a pixelated look to it. And so, for instance, here we'll go to the window size of 640 by 360, and that's that 16:9 resolution. As you can see, as I expand it, we're going to change that, and that's because I have the stretch mode set to keep. But as you scale the window to, let's say, 1920 by, we can just pick a window size of 1920 by 1080, which is the usual resolution, you can see that even though this window is 1920 by 1080, I'm only rendering 640 by 360 pixels. And of course, I'm not seeing any letterboxing because the window is perfectly sized for the 16:9 ratio. But as I expand the window, now we start to see horizontal letterboxing. And that's entirely because it's saying, well, how do I fill in this area? I can't. I'm only rendering 640 by 360 pixels. That's as much as I'm going to do. And so if you're expanding the window beyond that, so if I'm on a widescreen, I'm just going to see these big black bars. And that's okay. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but that is the choice you're making. And similarly, we can even go down if you've got a 320 by 180 pixel art game, then you can see we've really stretched out this image as we change that. And we can change the window size down to something more reasonable. But if we make it really big, you can see we're really stretching it out. And just to show you the content scale mode, if we switch it instead to viewport, now you can see the resolution has changed for all those. You're not seeing that nice crisp text because the text is in fact rendered at 320 by 180, and then it's just getting blown up, which will pixelate things. And of course you can see George Carlin's picture gets pretty ugly. Whereas canvas items, everything stays sharp. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a distinction there with what the difference is there. All right. Finally, we've got stretch modes. So we have aspect ratios. We can have ignore, for example. Now, if you set the aspect ratio mode to ignore, you can see as you change the window sizes, it's just going to stretch to fill all that space. It doesn't care. You've got 320 by 180 pixels that are being rendered, or for instance, I could switch it to, 640 by 480, which is a more square, 4 by 3 aspect ratio. You can see it's really going to stretch out, but we can still see the 640 by 480 pixels. So that's where the content scale mode is different than that. And of course, as you change those resolutions, you'll start to see more and more. And this is a 16 by 10 resolution. But if you use the aspect ratio and you do it on a 16 by 9 monitor, you're going to see a little bit of squishing of the pixels, and it's going to be a little bit more flattened out. And that's probably not what you want. So for the stretch mode, to ignore is probably not the most commonly used since it distorts things, whereas keep would be the more common, and then you just see the letterboxing. You can also do things like keep width, and you can play around with that, but that'll keep the width the same. But as we kind of get down, you'll start to see, oh, okay, well, once we keep the width at the right angle, if I make the window bigger, the width is going to stay the same. It's not going to distort it. So I'm just going to start to expose more and more of the canvas below that. And so now you can see that yellow region, which is the 1920 by 1280. And if I squish it narrower and then make it taller, I'll see even the 4K image starting to be shown. Of course, it's scaling it down and up as you go. And keep height is just the exact opposite. All right, it's going to keep the height the same, but as I expand beyond that, you'll start to see more and more horizontally. It'll start to fill in from the rest of the canvas. And then expand just kind of does both. So if it's squished this way, it'll try and do the wide, but if it goes wider than that, then the sort of the keep width comes into play. So it kind of does more of that when you're expanding. All right. And then finally we have the screen selector, so you can read and find different screens, and you can have a user pick, I want the game to be on my TV monitor, so select screen 1, and this will report the resolution of the current screen. So as you can see, my current screen is a 2K ultra wide, so it's 3440 by 1440. But if I switch it over to my TV screen, I'm gonna have to bring the window back over. Sorry, give me a sec. So if I bring it back over, you can see it's now supposedly on the other screen, which is my TV, which is 4K, so that's 3840 by 2160. And you can even set the window mode to minimize, then it just goes away, or full screen. It'll go to full screen mode. Oh shoot. Let me go back to maximized, and now I'll get my title bar back, and you can set those parameters. So how do we do that? And there's two important features in Godot that you're going to need to know about. And let's just go to our project now so we can see how this project works. So I'm going to just click here and go to the the script that I have set up. So the two most important ways you find out the window information is the display server and the window and the root window. So in Godot, everything is sort of stuck into the root window, which is derived from a viewport. So if we went to the docs, you would see that the window is inherited from the viewport class. And maybe in a different one we can talk about viewports, but I think there's actually quite a number of good tutorials on using viewports and how to sort of use them as textures, and that's probably a little bit beyond the scope of this. But you can see, if we come down here, most of what the code is doing is using getTree.root. And getTree.root, let me zoom in. getTree.root is the way you get the root window. So .root is a window, and if we just look at what root is a window. And so getTree gets the the base level of your nodes, and then it's going to return the window that everything is being printed on. And that's where you can get access to a lot of these different functions. And we'll just kind of go through the code one by one so you can see what each one is doing. But basically, most of what it's doing is just setting the different parameters that the window has: content scale mode, window size, content scale mode. All of those things are basically just features of the window. The one exception to that is the display. Let me see if I can find it. I do have these broken into regions, so we can do that, but I think I have it on screen selection and window setup, so we'll just collapse all that. And if we go down to screen selection, where is it on? Where did I put it? Set window mode, set screen. So set screen will set that, and we can get information from Godot about what the resolution of the current monitor is and that kind from the display server. And so we'll talk about that. So let's just kind of look at the project really quickly. We'll go back to our window. Where are you? And we'll just start at the beginning. So window size. Should be fairly obvious. This is just a drop down of resolutions I put in, just some default values, but of course you can put in more. But if we look at the window size setup, what I've done is we just have an option box. So if we look at the display settings node, and we look at our tab container, I just have a tab container that's doing each of these settings separately. So if we look at the window size, it's just got an option box, and in that option box just has a bunch of different vector 2i's, and vector 2i's are just the width and the height set separately. So I just have this list I made, which has different vector 2's, and I just put in, I just made this little class called window size item that just holds in values and just allows me to retrieve those values fairly easily and then set the window size based on that. But it just holds a width, a height, and a size vector 2i. Why it needs all three, it doesn't. I just have all those values separately in case you want to use them. And it will print out quite a number of stuff down here in the bottom to sort of just show you what the current monitor is and that kind of stuff. So here's a window size item, and so I'm just making in the display settings, I'm just making a whole bunch of these window size items with different sizes, and that's going to populate that option button list where you get just those different resolutions showing up. So basically, here is where I make the list, and then I go down here to the window size. So let's go to my ready function, and I'll just collapse all these things so that it's not too noisy. So here in the ready function, we're just going to grab that window size things, and then we're just going to connect to a handler. Like when I actually make a selection, please do something. So we'll look at that in a second, but that's just going to connect the signal. When I change an item, please run a function. And then I'm just going to go through Interestingly, Godot's enums are a little bit just like arrays, so they kind of have some information in them, so you can use that to your advantage. So here's my list, and here's the size of the list. So it's just going through from 0 to the side to all the different resolutions I put in, and it's just adding them one by one to the option button. And I am populating the option button values each with some metadata, and that metadata is the window size item. So rather than just pulling back a value and then having to retranslate that to the vector, I'm just getting the window size item back from the metadata. I hope that makes sense. All right, and then once we have that set up, then the question is, well, when I make that selection, what happens? And that's where the event handler comes. And so we'll just collapse all these other ones. So we'll go to the set size and we'll have a look at that. So in the set size, we have the once the option button is triggered, right, it gives you an index. And I'm just using that index to grab the metadata from that index, which is a window size item. So as you can see, I'm just saying the window size that the user picked, get that value back, and then I'm going to get tree and dot root, and get tree dot root gives me back the window, and then all you have to do is set the size of the window, which is a value, and you just set that to the size I have. And so this window size is, for example, going to return, let's say I pick 640 by 480, that's what it's going to make the window size. And so when we run the function in our game and we just go to the window size, you can see it's just going to change the size of the window. Obviously 320 by 280 is too small to see, but if I pick something a little bit bigger, like 1280 by 800, you can start to see the window again, and that'll just set the window size. Now again, there are more parameters. I don't have those listed, but that keeps you from resizing. So you can set resizable to false, for example, if you don't want people being able to drag the window out. But it doesn't. It just sets the size, but the user is still, as long as the window's resizable, can still drag on that. So that's just setting the size of that. But I think more importantly is the combination of the window size and the content scale size. And the content scale size, I think, is the more important, is obviously the other important factor, is especially when you're doing pixel art games and you want to do that rendering at like 320 by 180 and then stretch it out, then you're going to use the combination of the content scale size at 320 by 180 and set the window size to be bigger, and making sure you're using one of those stretch modes to dictate the stretch size. And so that's what we'll look at next. So we'll look at the content scale setup. So as you can see, I just have pretty much the same. I just copied and pasted the window size list, and I'm even using window size item as the content scale just to make my life easier. But you could of course set it to different things if you wanted to. But here's my content scale size list, and it does this basically the same thing. And the content scale mode is whether you're going to actually stretch that. And like I said, if you're going to use this feature, you have to not only set the content scale size, but also the content scale mode to disable canvas items or viewport, and depending on what your needs are. So let us just look now. So we'll go down to the content scale features in the ready function. And this is, again, just setting up the option buttons, where we're just connecting to a function for the signal. Anytime we make a new selection, call this function and give us the value. And so we'll get the content. We'll just add each of those window size items to the option button and set the metadata so we can get that back. And then here, for example, is the content scale selection. And this one, I did make a custom enum. Where are you? So I just have the enums, and they're listed the same. So the enums are just disabled, canvas item, and viewport. That way you don't have those, big gigantic names that you'll see in that. So let's just kind of go through that code and have a look and see what it's doing. So we're going to go down to the content scale feature, and content scale So here's our event handler, and then we're going to do content scale size first. So when the option button for the content scale size is changed, so if here we click over to the tab for content scale size, you can see that we have all those same values. And the stretch mode, of course. So disabled means you're basically, it doesn't matter what you set that rendering to, it doesn't matter because you're not stretching the content. It's disabled. But if you select, for instance, canvas item, now we're rendering, we've decided we want to render a 320 by 180, and we're using the canvas items to stretch, so that's why George looks nice. So this selection box, every time we change it, it's going to call this function, and it's just going to set, again, get tree root, so we're getting the window, and we're just going to set the content scale size to whatever size we get back. I hope that makes sense. Similarly, we're going to do the content scale mode. The function is a little different, just be aware of that, because instead of we're using enums this time around, and this is just setting the window property. So in this case, we have populated the list. So if we go up to the content scale setup, right, we have this enum, and we go to our ready function, and if we look at content scale mode, where's our ready function? Content scale features. And then if we go down, I'm just running through. So again, like I said, the enums have a size just like a list does, and that makes your life a little bit easier. So I can just go through my range of the different enums and just add each of the names. And basically the enums return a key value pair. I think they're basically dictionaries, honestly, the way Godot is handling them. But you can get the keys and the values so that I'm just adding items based on where they start in the beginning. And so, the first enum is 0, the second one is 1, the second one is 2, and I do have a little video about enums and bitwise if you are confused about what enums are, but we're just going through each enum and just adding the value, and that's going to give us the name. Because when we add an item to the option button, you can see it comes in with a label, which is a string, and then the ID of it, and that's what I'm putting the key into the name, and the value is that. And like I said, as an enum is created, it's basically, I think, a dictionary, so it has that information in it. So every time when I make a new enum, it's getting, like, disabled is the name of the key, and the value is going to equal by default 0. You can specify it directly if you want to, but otherwise it's just going to start at 0, 1, and 2. All right, and that's just going to, then I'm just going to match those. So disabled is the same, and you can always go to content scale mode disabled, and it'll tell you the value of the enums too, so you can make sure that you're using the right value for the right one. But you just set the scale mode to the proper enum, which is window content scale mode disabled. I could set it to just disabled too, and that would work, because again, this enum value, which is 0, is the same as this enum value, which is 0. So you're just setting the scale mode 0 to 0 every time when you match, when the person selected that index, that corresponds to the same enum. Hope that makes sense. So now let's just keep going through these things. So that's the content scale mode. Remember, you got to have both the content scale mode and the content scale size set if it's gonna function. All right. I think what's the next up on the list? So then the next one is the stretch mode, and that's where we saw the ignore versus keep. And I won't belabor this. But we will talk about the scale factor in just a second. So the content scale mode, where are you? So let's just collapse everything. So I want to do aspect. I think I labeled it aspect ratio. And here are just the enum that has the various. Of course, I've got the option button aspect ratio pulled in, and I have an enum that has all the same values: ignore, keep width, keep height, and expand. And then similarly in the ready function, it's pretty straightforward. It's just like we did in the content scale content scale mode selection box, right? It's canvas items versus that. In this case, we're going to do, we're just going to add all those ones, keep, ignore. And there are default set. I think keep is actually the default set. So my code, I think, just has by default the 0 set, but that's actually not what's currently selected. You do have to specifically select keep. Ignore if you want ignore set, because keep is the default. So you'd have to reselect it if you want that. So that's a little bit of a bug, but I don't know if I have the energy to really go through all the necessary stuff to pick the defaults and then do that. So just be aware of that. And so it just goes through adding those key value pairs. Just so we can select them later in that, and then we of course have added the signal connect. So when we look at it, I think it was fairly straightforward what it was doing. I think in most cases. Oh, did I close it? Oh, I did stop it. Okay, so let's just run the current scene. So I think in most cases, we'll set the window size to 1920 by 1080. And we'll set the content scale to, let's do 640 by 360. And of course, we'll do viewport. And so now we've stretched it to 640 by 360 into a 1920 by 1080 window. And we can look through the stretch modes and you can see the keep versus ignore and all that stuff. So this is keep, which is the default. Ignore will distort it. Keep with we'll do that other little bit. So remember, expand depends on whether you're going this way or this way, and you'll start to see more content. All right. The content scale factor is a little bit interesting. It's there for like UI elements and that kind of thing. It basically just magnifies everything on the screen. It's not a whole lot different than just setting those. I mean, if you set the window size in the content scale mode and you have a stretch, it's basically doing the same thing as that, but it does give you like an easy slider. If you wanted, just for example, wanted to do a UI and have this part of the UI work, then you can use the content scale factor to allow a user to just make their UI bigger or smaller depending, or the entire game if you prefer that. But that'll just allow you to zoom in if you want with an easy slider. And the way I set that up is pretty straightforward too. I just have this horizontal slider. So this is, I just have the current scale factor, and that tells me, so I get the current get tree root. So I'm just going to set it to whatever the current content scale factor is, which by default is 1. And then anytime I'm finished dragging, I call the event handler. And the event handler for both of these guys, so here's the horizontal scale, it's just going to get tree, get root, right? Getting the root window, that's how you're going to set it. And you're going to set the content scale factor to the value. And that's where it is. And again, I think a pretty helpful thing is to just look through the docs, right? You can go to the root and you can click on window and it'll tell you, it kind of has all of these things on it. I think the content scale to some degree, content scale mode, content scale factor, and you can just click on it and it'll tell you what all this stuff is. So, you don't necessarily have to even listen to all this. You can just read the docs and a lot of that is there, but sometimes it's helpful to get walked through it. All right. Oh my goodness. So here we have, and then this is just updating the label to show you what your current scale factor is once you've let go of the slider. All right, and then moving right along. I haven't implemented this yet. Maybe I'll get around to it. But the content scale mode is fractional versus integer. And so if you're doing a pixel perfect game, you want integer so that everything stays nice and crisp. If you're kind of doing more of a hand painted style with full resolution textures and that kind of stuff, then fractional is probably what you want. So integer scaling just means the window has to be an integer multiple, and everything is factored up. So if you're doing those pixel perfect games of like 320 by 180 and you need the window to be exactly, and the content being scaled exactly to those dimensions, you would want to select integer scaling. Again, I don't have that, but set up. But it's really easy once you understand that you just get tree root. root, you're going to see that mode. So if we just do get tree root content scale, I want to say it's stretch. Let's see. No, let's see. That's a Boolean. Come on. Let's see, which one was it? Integer. Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. It was content scale stretch. So content scale stretch will either be fractional or integer, and that'll give you those options. So apologies, I haven't implemented that. Hopefully, maybe I'll do that before I set the code, but no promises. And then finally, I think was the screen. And so one of the ways you're going to get the user's screen value is through the display server. And so let's just look through that really quickly. So I think that's on the screen selector. And as you can see, it's reporting the current value of my screen, or your screen should be different depending on what monitor you have, and which screen is the default, which is the first one selected. So let's just look at that code really quickly so you can see it. And for example, where are we? Screen selection. All right, let's just collapse everything and then go through it. So screen selection and window mode. So that's where we're going to get the windowed, minimize, maximize, full screen. So I made a enum with those guys, and we have an option button to both set the screen based on what screens are available to us and set the window mode. All right, so let's just look at that in the ready function. Let's collapse this one and open up this one. And as you can see, we have the current screen resolution is getting information from the display server. So the display server is a preload. And it gives you, or a singleton if you prefer, and it has a lot of information that you can get off of it, and you can just control click through and see, oh my goodness, you can get a lot of information. Now there's a lot of deprecated stuff because they really want you to use get tree root to do most of your changes, so you will still see some stuff like display server, get window or set window size. And screen size and that kind of stuff, but most of the time you want to use the window. But when you need information like from the operating system, then display server is your go-to. There is also OS, and the OS singleton does have some of that information as well. Unfortunately, it doesn't, like neither I could find reported stuff like the GPU name or what GPUs were available, or the like monitor, EDID information, which says, oh, it's the LG, Samsung, or whatever monitor. I couldn't find anything that did that, but and because a lot of that's OS specific, so you would have to have different versions for like Linux, Mac, and Windows, and I think Godot is just trying to keep it more cross-platform. All right. So to get that information from the display server, we're going to use the display server.get the screen get size, and then we're going to get the primary screen. That's going to be the default, and I'm just going to put that into the label text. But again, as we switch it, we'll connect it to a function. So we will do we will, for example, connect both the set screen as well as the set window mode to functions to handle those. The screen mode is handled by the window. The set screen is also handled by the window, but getting the screens, the number of screens, that's getting the count. So example, here's the number of screens we have. We use display server get screen count, and I'm just setting the primary screen here to getting the primary screen, and so it's going to show you the value of those variables in the text output. Let's see, window mode is just going to set those parameters which we had set up, right? Window, minimize, maximize, full screen, and then exclusive full screen. So if you want to give the users the options of doing that, we'll see how to set those. So let's just go quickly down to the event handlers, and we'll just collapse these guys. So I think we want to do, where are you? Set screen. So here's the set screen. And you can see we're just, from that option button pull down, we're going to select the 2 screens we made available. Or for instance, for me, I have 2 screens, but it'll go through, if you have 3 monitors or 4 monitors or just 1 monitor, then there'll just be 1 option listed. And we're just going to get tree root, right? We're going to get the window, and we're just going to set the current screen. And when you change that value, when you change that that property, it moves the window to the new screen. But of course, you can drag it back, and then it has no idea unless you're going to hook up, window moved events and that kind of stuff to detect, oh, the user dragged it back on. Then just be careful of that, because if you do have the window handles, and you can pull it back onto the other monitor, you might change things without realizing it. So just you might have to be prepared if the window is moved to check which screen you're currently on and which screen the window is currently on, using the screen it's on, and then update that. So mine, there's a little bit of a break in there if that happens. But I don't have the energy to code all the nuances. But if you might have to for your finished game. And it's just going to tell me, hey, which screen, what's the resolution, update the resolution to the new current screen. And that'll give you the information, like how big do I want to make the window by default. If I want to detect the resolution of the primary screen that the game is displayed on, or hey, the user moved it, what should I set the screen size to if that kind of thing happens. Now, fortunately, if you set the window mode, for example, to full screen, it'll set it to full screen on the selected monitor that it is on. So, for example, if I go here and I set it to my TV screen, drag it back, and set it to exclusive full. Well, the problem is now when I set it to exclusive full screen, it's going to go on this current monitor. But let me just turn on my TV and then make you promises. So let's just do this quickly. And tanks are moving into LA as I speak. That's fun. And let us now go back to windowed. But if I go and select it to, let's put it on screen 0 and then move it to screen 1. So now it's on my TV over here. And if I go to exclusive full screen, it goes to full screen on the TV and no longer on here. So just be aware that the screen selector, when it's exclusive full screen, knows that you move the window, whereas even if you've changed the selection. But now I popped it back to screen 0, and you can see it automatically moved it to full screen mode over here. And let me just find my mouse. Here it is. And I can set it just to regular full screen or maximized. And it moved back to the other window. So let's just set it to screen 0. And here we go. All right, where's my mouse? So let's just, interesting. It changed the window border to old school. That's like Windows 7. All right. So anyways, I hope that gives you a little bit of a sense of how you're going to dynamically do that. And like I said, there's a whole lot of options you probably have to go through, but at least it kind of gives you an introduction into that. Now, there are this whole concept, and I just started up a preliminary scene here. But as you can see, what do you do if you want different things? The answer is going to be using viewports, sub-viewport containers, and that kind of thing to manage it. So you could, for instance, have your UI rendered at this, the full screen resolution with beautiful sharp text and everything, and have a sub-game window, either from a viewport if you don't need that much functionality, or you can add a window where you'll have full control over all those settings like we did, and play the game inside that either sub-viewport or or the full window if you need all those other additional settings, like you want to switch it to canvas item stretch or that kind of thing. Unfortunately, some of that is not there on the viewport, but it is there on a window. So you either will have to choose a viewport or a window in order to do that kind of stuff. But there are plenty of good tutorials on that, so I'm not going to double up on that. Anyways, I hope this was helpful, and good luck making your game.